It's week 3, and I already feel like we've been through so much of the season, and it should be over at this point. We've got quarterback injuries, we've got backfield touches changing on a week to week basis. The storylines have been so much so that I don't even know how we're going to approach the remainder of the season or how many other twists and turns any of us can stand. But to help you out, I'm here to at least go through some of your questions and any other strategy discussions that you want to have. I guess maybe I should introduce myself. For those who don't know, my name is Chris Allen. I'm one of the analysts here at Fantasy Life, and we're here to talk Guillotine Leagues. I mean, the format that I seem to find myself getting involved in more and more these days because it is one of the, I would say, the last areas of from a strategy standpoint that really we can really start to dive into because of the format and how it works. We can say that these are going to be we can change essentially our approach to building our teams and also restructure our waivers and how we acquire players on a week to week basis. So if you have any questions, drop them here in the chat. I'm either here or like hit me up on social media at Chris Allen FFWX, and I'm here to at least try and help you navigate the rest of the season. So we've got a few user emails and questions that have come in, so I think we'll start there as folks continue to trickle in. But as you have some other issues or things along those lines, again, happy to help out as much as I can. Let's see. The first question here. I'm not sure who they all come from, but these are just some user questions that we've gotten, and we'll try and put those up like from like each week as we start to dive into this. But first question: saw a great thread on Reddit about not holding all of your fab early and spending big. Where do you fall in the spend or not to spend camp? For at least my approach to building a roster from week 1 all the way into, at least if I can get to that point, week 16. And actually, real quick, the first time that I played Guillotine Leagues, and I wrote about this in the Guillotine newsletter for folks that haven't checked that out, please go over to guillotineleagues.com. You should be able to sign up for the free newsletter, and you'll see some content from yours truly on each week. I try and dive into some of the intrusive thoughts that I have after seeing some of the games and how things from a usage and narrative standpoint, the actual things that we see out there on the field, how that's going to project on a week-to-week basis. And one of the things and one of the topics you'll see out in the newsletter for this week is my general thoughts on Daniel Jones. And I actually saw a notification from, I think it was ESPN, and actually producer Lamarca. We were talking about that just before we went live, just about how the sustainability of Daniel Jones is going to be. And I put in a few notes about that. But either way, my first time in Guillotine Leagues, it was about, I think it was the 2022 timeframe, and drafted the team, not really sure what I was doing. And after week 1, I survived the very first week. And of course, I go into waivers to try and build up my team, and I see Lamar Jackson sitting there on the waiver wire. And I think I went the mid-round QB, late-round QB approach. Wasn't sure who I had. I don't remember who I had at this point. But of course, you see Lamar Jackson out there, and you want to try and make an upgrade to your roster. So I dropped all of my fab on Lamar Jackson. Saw him on there, picked him up, and afterwards, I think he made it through one more game, and then afterwards he had a dud. I believe it might have been against the Bills or somebody along those lines. Out, I think, 2 weeks later. So since then, I've tried to figure out how best to approach building my team or adjusting my roster as each week goes by and more players start to fill up on the waiver wire and better players start to end up on the waiver wire. So that's why I wanted to at least go through this particular question, at least provide you with my thoughts on my particular approach here. And if we could pull up the screen or my shared screen real quick, I'll take you over to my roster real quick. That's over on guillotineleagues.com. And you can see here like my current roster here. Now, don't make fun of me. All right. I tried my best. It's a 16-team league. What are you going to do when you have that many people drafting rosters? So you wind up with, I would say, a fairly good compilation of running backs and wide receivers. And I got Travion Henderson, but you guys see where that particular pick has been going over the last couple of weeks. It is what it is. And all the way down at the bench, I mean, we threw some darts here and there. I think I just picked up Chris Rodriguez today, but Tank Bigsby, I thought he was going to be the guy that would be able to work behind Travis Etienne. Then he gets shipped off to Philadelphia. Kendre Miller, they were highlighting or hyping him up towards the back end of preseason to work behind Alvin Kamara. That hasn't really borne out any fruit yet, but we'll see in Olamide Zaccheaus. So it's not the best, right? But it's at least some place to start with. And it's at least a place for you to hopefully provide enough of a floor so that you can get out of week one and into week two. But here's typically been my approach. I definitely, especially after that story I just told you about using all of my fab in one fell swoop to to pick up one player. My approach has now been to try and make small upgrades here and there, and I'll tell you what I'm talking about. So let's say beforehand, let's say for Jacoby Myers specifically, uh, he is like so far. But actually, that's not even the best example. Let's say I believe I had to start Rashid Shaheed in week one. Rashid Shaheed, while a solid wide receiver, 2, 3, depending on how you view his not his value but also his usage, he's not the particular wide receiver, especially from a boom bust standpoint, that you would want for Guillotine Leagues on a week in week out basis. Because folks know that is a guy that you would particularly want for doesn't provide you the floor that you would want like each particular week. He has that high variance type of usage, used downfield, might get a touchdown here and there, and he has so far. But from that standpoint, I'd be looking for upgrading on that particular position or upgrading to find a wide receiver that can give me at least a more consistent output on a week in, week out basis. So once I go out on the waiver wire in order to find some new players, those are the types of guys that I'm looking for. And I believe actually, and if I might have drafted, I don't believe I drafted Jacoby Myers, but those are the types of players that I would want to acquire on the waiver wire and replace with a guy like Rashid Shaheed. Whereas, sure, you'll see your, let's say, your Lad McConkeys, your Jamar Chases, your T. Higgins, the wide receiver ones that would have the usage rates that would also garner the interest from every other league, every other manager in your particular league. You're going to be fighting tooth and nail from a fab budget standpoint in order to pick up any of those wide receivers. Whereas instead of trying to make the home run swing in week one and spend even 20, 30, 40% of your budget in order to make that one acquisition, I could spend half of that to make an upgrade at another spot. And that might have been like slightly lower down on my priority list. Of course, I would want to be able to replace a Rashid Shaheed with a T. Higgins. Well, not now. I mean, especially y'all see my hat. Like, I'm not happy with where the Cincinnati Bengals are at right now. But either way, if you could make that type of upgrade to go from wide receiver 2, 3 to a high end, even mid tier wide receiver 1, those would be the easier decisions. Of course, we would want to make that leap. But if you can only make an upgrade from a wide receiver 4 to a wide receiver 3, or wide receiver 3 to a wide receiver 2, those are and use less of your budget in the process. That's the typical way that I like to approach spending my fab on a week in, week out basis. It doesn't require as much of your money. You're able to continually churn your roster, but instead of making those large leaps on a week in, week out basis, like you typically would once you're in your normal managed leagues, where you are trying to find that new running back that is going to make the replacement for the guy that's injured in front of him, a la the Jordan Mason, Aaron Jones situation for this week, or insert injury in situation here. Here, for especially in Guillotine Leagues, trying to find these smaller acquisitions that you can make, these small upgrades here and there, and just swapping out some of your bench players, your depth players, and even see like the guys on the back end of my roster here. So let's say I survive the next week, and there's a new crop of players that's left out on the waiver wire. I would be looking for let's say an RB3 to replace Kendre Miller. I would be looking for a wide receiver 3 to replace Olamide Zaccheaus, assuming he continues to output that on this current pace that he's at right now. Those would be the small tweaks that I would make so that I only have to spend 5% of my budget on a week to week basis, maybe 10%, depending on the particular player that might be out there on the waiver wire. So those are the ways that I try and approach at least fab. And that's probably based off of me taking one big swing and falling flat on my face 3 or 4 years ago. But at least for me, it allows me to cycle in some more players that have a bit more of a floor ceiling combination versus swinging for the just the ceiling outcome for some of the players currently on my roster, like the Rashid Shaheeds and even a guy like Tank Bigsby when I drafted him. That is more of a longer term bet because even at the start of the season, let's say even if he was going to stay with the Jaguars, his workload split with Travis Etienne was something of an uncertainty. We didn't know if he was like, or even when he was going to take over that backfield as so many of us wanted to project. So while it's fair to make some of those throw those darts towards the back end of our draft at the Tank Bigsby's of the world, the Kendre Millers, like those types of folks, cycling them out for even just some of the wide receiver 3, 4, the running back threes on other rosters, or even just some additional tight ends that might have a shot to rotate in on their specific passing games. Those are the guys that I want to try and at least work into my roster in some way, shape, or form, just so that I can continue to have enough players that, again, provide you that floor that you need in order to survive for the next week. So that's my logic. But again, if you have a different approach to it, or if you're trying to just hold all your fab until the big injury news hits and you want to be able to pounce on that player that's going to be of interest that you think you'll be able to ride for the next 2-3 months, completely understand that approach. But at least for me, those small tweaks here and there have been at least my general approach for building my roster and also how I spend my fab. But all right, so let's see what else have we got here. So I mean, I see a couple of folks in the chat trying to talk, like going back and forth, talking about some of their waiver wire acquisitions, like heading into the week. But if you have any other questions, again, more than happy to try and answer them live here on the show. Got some questions that you want to hit me up with later. We can talk back and forth. I'm pretty sure my DMs are open. But yeah, definitely try and hit me up on Twitter at Chris Allen FFWX. Try and hit up any other analysts and say, hey, try to drop a line to Chris, what's going on? I mean, but I'll be here every Wednesday evening to answer some of your questions about your Guillotine Leagues. Let's see, what else have we got? So it's another question. Would you rather have a bench full of RB handcuffs or a bench full of guys at different positions who have a 2 to 5 point projection differences from your flex spot? Actually, so you know what? Let me reshare my roster real quick, just so that we can have at least some sort of visualization to compare to, because that's an interesting question, and that would essentially change how you would draft or how you would put together your roster from day one. Because the way that I'm looking at it is I try and draft a team almost similarly to how I would draft a typical managed league, where you do have a number of, let's say, at least provide myself with some flexibility at both the running back and wide receiver position. And just based off of PPR scoring that I typically have for the Guillotine Leagues that I play in, I always lean more wide receiver heavy than anything else. So I do have at least, well, let's see, how many do I have here? 1, 2, and I know I've made some changes here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 7 wide receivers. But this question's asking, would you rather have a bench full of running back handcuffs or a bench full of guys at different positions? So let's think through that for a second. So a bench full of running back handcuffs, and I'm thinking about the guys that are not just like some of the running backs that I see here, the Chris Rodriguez, the Tank Bigsby's, the Kendre Millers, and even Jordan Mason, even though Mason had more of a mid-round average draft position coming in like throughout most of the offseason, and especially towards the mid to late portions of the preseason, when a lot of the news about his 1A, 1B split between Aaron Jones was foot stomped by head coach Kevin O'Connell. And of course, Aaron Jones, I believe, reiterated the same thing in a couple of press conferences, like in the early August timeframe. But either way, I do think there is some viability to approaching it like that. I think the reason for that is we as a community are getting smarter on a year-to-year basis, how we draft different positions and how we use some of the news items that we see, the blurbs and press conferences, and how all of that gets distilled into, I would say, actionable information. Folks like the Coach Peak Index that's out there on social media right now and highlighting how much or how often a player is mentioned, strategies, particular workloads. All of that is a part of, is now, I would say, information that gets pushed out to us fairly often, to the point where the market starts to shift based off of what we hear. It's not just hearsay anymore. There is some, I would say, validity to some of that information that gets pushed, that gets kicked out to us in, like, from a verbal standpoint. So while it's not quantifiable, if you hear some of these things enough, they do start to become at least a part of our discussions as we look to the market and try and assess player value. So the way that I'm looking at this is, yes, I think there is some utility to drafting. I wouldn't say all of my bench spots having being full of running back handcuffs, but I would say a primary portion of them. Because as you can see here, out of the 6 bench spots that I've got, 3 of them are filled with some of those dart throws that you would want to make anyway at the running back position. Because I think I just grabbed Chris Rodriguez, but I drafted Tank Bigsby. I grabbed Kendre Miller. And actually, I believe the other running back that I had on my roster beforehand was Dameon Pierce. Because I was looking to see how that Texans backfield was going to shake out between him and Woody Marks and also Nick Chubb. So from a draft standpoint, absolutely. And if you want to go completely towards drafting all of your running backs, having them be those guys that you would want to take in the back end of your draft, or even just guys that we would label as handcuffs. So instead of Ken Walker, you grabbed Zach Charbonnet. Instead of drafting Caleb Johnson, you had Jalen Warren on your roster, even though that one would completely turn out to be a hit, because Caleb Johnson, especially after this past Sunday and the special teams, let's say, boo-boo that he had out on the field, we probably won't see him on the field too terribly often here in the near future. But either way, those are the types of swings you should be making anyway. And honestly, that's the type of approach that I would assume most folks would apply in their managed league. So I'm completely with that. While I wouldn't say that I would go overboard and have all of my bench slots filled with the running back handcuffs. Instead of the 3 you see here, maybe 4 out of the 6, 5 out of the 6, and maybe have an extra wide receiver. That's just my personal preference. But having a majority of your bench slots filled up with the running back handcuffs, just so that after week 1, let's see how things shake out with a couple of players here and there. Oh, Dameon Pierce is going to be more of a healthy scratch, and it's going to be the Woody Mark show. All right, let's cycle him out for another wide receiver that might be operating well, like a Quentin Johnston that happened to start learning how to catch passes more often than not, or whomever else like starts to show up after the week 1 action rolls in. And then so one of the other key things that I'm thinking about now in applying that type of approach is that you don't have to, at least assuming you're waiting until the back in your draft to actually add some of these running backs, there's not a lot of, I would say, opportunity costs that you're sacrificing in order to do that. As you can see on my roster here, these are all running backs that are drafted towards the back end or the late parts of your draft. I mean, I mentioned Jalen Warren and Jordan Mason and Zach Charbonnet. Yeah, those guys always, like, they had early round ADPs, and like there is a higher draft cost associated with them. But the rest of these guys, yeah, you could draft them in the 14th, 15th, 16th round, like somewhere in there. And so because we're mostly throwing darts once we get into that portion of the draft anyway, and we're drafting for depth, and we're drafting to maybe lean into some uncertainty, or maybe a news blurb that you saw here and there that said, well, Kendre Miller is going to be the guy behind Alvin Kamara, and he might mix in for more touches. Okay, fine. So you add him to your team and see how that shakes out. So I don't have too much of an issue with applying that approach. Again, like I was saying earlier, my only approach or my only adjustment to it would be, instead of just going completely all out with running back handcuffs, maybe add in a wide receiver just so from the positional flexibility, because since you do have, and as you can see here from my roster, the 2 wide receivers and the 2 flex, if I'm looking to maybe boost my floor a little bit, I personally try and put wide receivers in those flex spots. But if you do it differently, then maybe going for nothing but running backs there makes some sense. All right. So let's keep moving on here. I've got a few more questions here, but if you do continue to have some questions like for me live here on just drop them here in the chat, or for next week, if you have any other questions, drop me a DM, hit me up on social media or something along those lines. Happy to answer them there. So let's see. Next question. In a now 16-team league, should I drop Jerome Ford? He's third on the depth chart now, right? Yeah, I think so. So my only concern with dropping a guy like Jerome Ford is while we're in this transition period with Quinshon Judkins having his first start in week 2, Dylan Sampson is still a part of the rotation. Will they still continue to lean on their running backs on a full committee standpoint? I understand wanting to use the early round draft pick or the early round running back that they took and see how productive he can be in his rookie season. And of course, they could use the boost to their offense. I know that having to rely on Joe Flacco's shoulder might be something of a tough bet on a week to week basis, but it does make some sense to at least maybe hold on to Jerome Ford. But let's see what the data says. If we could pull up the utilization report, and for folks that don't have the, I believe, tier 2 subscription, to fantasylife.com and being able to see some of that information and how some of these players are getting used on a week to week basis, that's where a lot of those decisions can become somewhat simpler. And once we see someone's numbers, because when you're watching the games, a lot of the, I would say, not just the usage, but watching it in real time, that can change essentially our perception of how these players are being deployed on a snap by snap, on a snap by snap basis. Because when you're seeing it, we don't really we see the play, we see the carry, we see the result, whether it's a touchdown, a drop at the line of scrimmage, or being stuffed behind the line of scrimmage. We don't always take into account the context in which they're used. And I don't know if you're anything like me, especially if I'm watching my Bengals on each Sunday. I don't always look at, well, all right, it's Chase Brown out there and it's 3rd and 5. And okay, he just got hit by line of scrimmage. All right, that's his 6th snap carrying it when they're within 5 yards, or that's his 4th carry when he's. I don't care about that. I want them to score. I'm waiting for them to get, or somebody to get into the end zone, whether it's Jamar, whether it's T, or whether it's Chase Brown. So this utilization report allows you to do a lot of that after the fact when you're not as emotional, or maybe that's just me getting emotional because that team is taking years off of my life. But either way, the way that Dwayne and the rest of the crew here at Fantasy Life have set up this tool, you can see a lot of that without having to at least relive some of the things that you see in real time on Thursdays, Sundays, and Mondays. So, all right, so let's look at Jerome Ford's usage from just week 2 specifically. And while he was out there for about 50% of the snaps, down to around 30% of the carries, and still mixing in for a couple of targets as well. And so that's why I'm not as reticent to say, well, it's the Quinshon Judkins role, or the Quinshon Judkins show. He's going to be the RB1, which he should, but that makes a guy like Jerome Ford completely droppable in every single Guillotine League. Seeing him still out there for that many snaps, and then also being involved in not just the rushing but also the passing game, he's not a guy that completely. It doesn't seem to me that this, at least right away, that the rushing workload is going to condense, or at least completely condense past the point where it's going to be just Judkins and Sampson or Judkins and Ford. So I'm not ready to drop him just yet, unless you have some other, I would say, high-end option that's out there on the waiver wire for you. Because going back to the roster that I just showed you on for one of my leagues over on GuillotineLeagues.com, just looking at the free agents available on waivers right now, I'll read you off the first 5 names of guys that are currently out there on the waiver wire in my league. 16-team league. Jeremy McNichols, Kyle Monungai, Tyler Beatty, Chris Brooks, Ty Johnson. If you think that Jerome Ford, even though he is the 3rd running back on the depth chart, I'm not going to argue with you there. But if you think that any of the running backs and their projected level of productivity, look at what Jeremy McNichols might be able to do, since he typically plays special teams with the Commanders. But I get he might see more snaps for Washington, since Austin Eckler went down last week with the Achilles tear. But okay, fine. But can you really see him having a larger role or more production than what Jerome Ford has been able to do? Same thing with Monungai, with DeAndre Swift, even though no real Chicago Bears running back has been able to produce. Swift did a decent amount of damage in week 1 when he had the entire backfield to himself. But since then, Bears from a run blocking standpoint has been tough to watch, especially just this past week. So I'm not seeing the level of production past what Ford has done so far. Same with Tyler Bates, same with Chris Brooks, same with Ty Johnson. So it's just, for me, it's not just the fact that Jerome Ford is the third on the depth chart. I'm looking at more of, let's compare him to some of the other options out there on the waiver wire. And if you really think that somebody else on the wire is going to be more productive than Ford, okay, fine. Put in the waiver claim, switch him out, and then go from there. But I'm looking at some of the other names as I scroll down: Samaje Perine, Antonio Gibson, Devin Singletary, Zamir White. I'm not trying to get those guys on my roster, at least compared to what Ford's been doing right now. So unless you have a plethora of running backs on your roster already, and you're looking to swap Jerome Ford out for a wide receiver, or even if you are hurt at the quarterback position and you need the bench space in order to go from, let's say, unfortunately, a Joe Burrow to a platoon of quarterbacks. Okay, I can understand that too. But if it's just a one-to-one swap out from a running back standpoint, even though, and as you saw from the utilization report, Jerome Ford is essentially sitting as the third running back for the Cleveland Browns, it's still productive enough, or he has still been productive enough. And I know it's just a one-game sample with Ford being the starter, that I'm willing to at least wait a week or two and see how things develop between those two running backs. Because again, looking at the how he's been used so far, and seeing how often that the Cleveland Browns are using their running back or their rushing attack, I would say that I would give him at least a 1 to 2 more weeks, unless things really start to change, like from a snap percentage. Because again, if you're just going to sit there and say, all right, or look at Ford and say, and his snap rate completely drops off, his pass game usage also completely drops off, then I would be more concerned. But with both of those elements still being a part of his usage, and we can see that there on the screen, like as you can see there from the screen share for the utilization report, I'm still willing to make that bet that he can still be a productive running back moving forward. Maybe not as useful, but especially once bye weeks start to hit, more running back injuries start to crop up, we might see a couple of players like in and out of the lineup. Again, I'm willing to give it a couple of more weeks and see how things turn out. So, all right. What else that we've got? What else do we have here? It's got some other questions. And again, if you have some more questions, I'm seeing some more folks like going back and forth, like in the chat. Again, if you got more inquiries for me, happy to help out as much as possible. Because again, I've got access to all the tools here. Again, if you don't want to have to, well, let's see, you should still pay. You should still subscribe to fantasylife.com. Go ahead and get that tier 2 subscription. And then afterwards, you have the same access to tools that I've got. But if you want me to look something up really quick for you, check out our rankings. Look at the utilization report, pull up some of the game log stuff that to help you make the same decisions and go through the same logic tree that I just walked through regarding Jerome Ford and his usage. Happy to do that for you and kind of work things out for you for your Guillotine League decisions. But all right, what else do we have here? Let's see, we're about 6:30 now, so I'll be around for another half hour and just hang out and see what we've got going on here. But let's see. How many tight ends should I have on my roster? I don't know. 2? Well, I mean, I don't know. Well, let's think about it real quick, because let me go back to my team real quick. Let's see, teams. So let's see. If I pull this up now, if I'm thinking about it just from comparing it to your managed league, right? I know Guillotine Leagues are different. You're trying to at least survive each week and get as many points as possible. So trying to look at a tight end who, unless you have, let's say your top end tight ends, right? George Kittle when he was healthy. But if you started off your draft with either Trey McBride, your Brock Bowers, even if you picked up Tucker Kraft like in the middle-ish rounds, those guys that are going to be used like each week. Okay, I can see having more than one tight end, but even from the guys like, well, as you can see on my roster here, I'm relying on Hunter Henry, which while he's out there running routes, also out there like earning targets from Drake May, like even his week in, week out output or his results from a box score standpoint, those can either be helpful because in week 1, he was at least a top 5, top 6 like tight end in PPR leagues. And then just this last week, not so much. I believe he only had like a couple of catches or something along those lines. So So that's the type of situation where I'm just not going to summarily say that you would want to have multiple tight ends. It's the types of tight ends that you would want to have on your roster. And then, of course, when I say the types of tight ends, it's what's their usage like? Well, how many routes are they running? How many targets can we logically project for them on a game to game standpoint? And then, of course, based off of what their usage is going to be, what are their, like, how much are you going to be willing to pay for them? And then, so looking at this, yes, that's exactly what I wanted to see right there. So looking at the utilization for tight ends, we can start to get a sense of, and for the column, let's say 3 from the right. So the utilization, the UR score, so that molds not just their usage, so the things that us nerds talk about, targets per route run, target share, their efficiency, catchable targets, how often they're getting end zone target. I mean, all of those, I think almost each one of those metrics that you see across the top. And then also their production as well. So how many fantasy points they're scoring. All that gets molded into a score that essentially says, well, if you're using or you're rostering a player with this high of a score, you should expect to see, I mean, relative to the rest of their peers, these are the types of guys that you should have, or this is based off of not just their usage, but also the results, the things that we actually care about. Me as a nerd, of course, I care about all of those things. I want to see guys with a targets per route run north of 20%. I want to see guys with a target share north of 25%, and their yards per route run over 2.0, something along those lines. But for the folks that just want to say, well, who do I need to draft, Chris? Who are the guys that I need to have on my roster? Well, then I can just point them to a singular metric and say, go get the guy with a UR score of 80 plus or 85 plus or something along those lines. Find those guys, then have them on your roster. So looking at this here, looking at this general list here, and this is just based off of what we've seen so far: Juwan Johnson, Trey McBride, Tyler Warren, Zach Ertz. Those are the types of guys that, while they're out there running routes, it's not just the fact that they're getting a cardio in, but it's also the fact that they're the ones earning targets for their particular squad. So how many tight ends should you have on your roster? 3 to 4 of just the tight ends that you can see from a week to week standpoint. You can project to see them having not just the targets, but also the targets most conducive to fantasy scoring. So if they're not just going to have the empty calorie looks, let's say a la I would say even like a Dalton Schultz, the guy that most of the guys that are going to be used in between the 20s, but they're also going to be used once their teams get within scoring position. So that's why Juwan Johnson, while he earned, I want to say 11 targets in week 1, was still able to keep up a 25% plus target share in week 2 from Spencer Rattler. I would almost look at that situation saying that, well, I don't really trust it. We weren't able to rely on Juwan Johnson in 2024. So what is it about his usage in 2025 that would make this a situation I want to continue to invest in? Why should I continue to look at this? So that's where I want to look at things like this here and say, okay, well, relative to the other tight ends, relative to the Trey McBrides, relative to the Tyler Warrens, again, comparing him to all the rest of those guys, this is what this tool allows you to do. So you can see it's not just the fact that he's fallen into the end zone a couple of times. It's also how often he's at running routes, how often he's getting targeted, and also just the general efficiency of the Saints offense as it stands right now through 2 weeks. That should allow us to have some level of confidence to continue to invest in those types of guys. So going back to the question, how many tight ends should you have on your roster? If you want to invest in I would say at the beginning of the season, the tight ends that we could reasonably rely on for not just routes, but also targets, and also I would say the fantasy relevant looks that we would want. So end zone targets, running routes in the red zone, all of that. Those that I would say 2 of those guys would be tops that I would want. And that's just because of the cost associated with them. Because remember where we had to draft Brock Bowers at? Probably around the 2nd round. Where do we have to draft Trey McBride or even Tucker Kraft? Those are going to be the earliest rounds where we would have to decide between them and a high-end running back or a decent wide receiver or even a quarterback, depending on if you wanted to get Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, all of those guys. So if I wanted to at least have some security at the position, so I would have to start one and then I could potentially flex another if you wanted to go that route. Let's say two of those guys would be tops. If you want to go the late round, or let's say not even late round, the mid round approach, and try and bank on a Tucker Kraft or a Hunter Henry or a Zach Ertz, guys that even in years past, we've seen them be involved in their team's passing games, but they can be up and down, and we would more or less have to platoon their production throughout the season in order to have something viable at the tight end position. I'd say about three of those would be fine, because there we're making a mid-level investment at the tight end position, but then afterwards it is now we're just throwing darts. We're looking at the Juwan Johnsons that we could potentially pick up, or I think there was some hype for guys like Elijah Arroyo for the Seahawks after the Evan Ingham trade, so on and so forth. So I'd say three tight ends would be fine, but then afterwards there's too much volatility associated with it. Because think about having to draft. I'll even blow this idea out. Let's say if you wanted to draft four tight ends. Not saying you do this, but let's take it to the extreme. Let's say four tight ends that you would want to draft. Let's say we'll take the four high-end tight ends. So you wanted to draft Brock Bowers, Trey McBride, George Kittle, and Mark Andrews, which is not the best example, but just to give you an idea. Well, that means you're drafting almost a tight end in the first, just straight 4 rounds. Again, based off of ADP, it wouldn't happen, but just follow my logic. But that would be each of your picks that you would have to sacrifice a wide receiver, running back, or quarterback in order to acquire those 4 guys. So that wouldn't make any sense. Now try and do it with maybe 2 high-end tight ends and then 2 late-round tight ends. All right, well, if you've got the 2 high-end tight ends, you're likely going to be starting one of them and potentially flexing the other, and the 2 are going to be sitting on your bench, hogging bench slots for other positions. So that doesn't work either. So that's where getting past 3 tight ends, depending, and even just trying to figure out where you would draft them, how it would make sense in order to have them on your active roster versus your bench, that becomes all the more of a situation that becomes that you're using too many slots for players that you're either trying to hold on to or start. So I would say around 3 tight ends is probably about the most that I would want to have on my particular squad. Before we get into a couple of questions, let's talk about one of our sponsors real quick. I wanted to give a shout out to Xfinity. And so introducing the 5-year guarantee from Xfinity, one internet price, 5 years guaranteed. Life is unpredictable, but the price of your internet shouldn't be. So you can get a reliable price for a reliable connection. And by all in, we mean all in. Get Wi-Fi equipment and unlimited data included. Change is always happening. RB1s seemingly never repeat. 2030's fantasy wide receiver 1 may not be in college yet, but no matter what changes in 5 years, the price of your internet will stay the same. Learn more at Xfinity.com. Restrictions apply. New residential customers only. Taxes and fees extra and subject to change. All right. So let's see. We got about 20 minutes left. Again, really appreciate you guys hanging out. Let's see if we can get to a few chat questions. Because it's been, I don't know, it's been kind of I wouldn't say weird week, but at the same time, it's trying to understand the fallout from all of these injuries that happened on Sunday, from Joe Burrow's stuff to what's going on with Jaden Daniels, and even just how we're going to approach the rest of these quarterback situations for the rest of the season and beyond. All right. So I see Terminal Sarcasm. I do see a question from you. What to bid on Gainwell? My league overbids, but I've been surviving at the bottom 5 each week. All right. So let's see. I will try and come up on the fly a process for figuring out, at least from a percentage standpoint, how much you could bid on a particular player. So if I were to go over to the utilization report tool, pull up the game log, and let's see how much he's been used, because I want to try and at least put together or use his usage rates and even his UR score to kind of figure out, okay, and let's see if we can try and even project how much he could be used in the future. And like we were talking earlier, for the Steelers to more or less, like, can we see him moving off of or see them moving away from Caleb Johnson in the short term? Yes, that was absurd what happened to Caleb Johnson uh, on special teams in week 2. But now looking at his usage, and I'll just even like through week 2, UR score of 52, Jalen Warren up at the top at UR score of 69, and even I saw the blurb from earlier today. I believe Aaron Rodgers spoke about Jalen Warren and how much he wants to try and get him the ball more, just given how effective Warren has been as a rusher and a receiver. So seeing the split between these two guys, I mean, Kenny Gainwell, not just in week 1, having about like 7 rush attempts, which worked out to be like 35-40% of the carries, and seeing a slight dip in his rushing rate in week 2 for Gainwell, down to 25%. But still, almost similar to what we were talking about with Jerome Ford, still has a usage, or still has like some role in the passing game. 17% target share. And it's not just the fact that he's getting used as a receiver. We're not seeing as much from no other wide receiver, or not even wide receiver, just pass catcher is really stepping up like for the Steelers right now. Even DK Metcalf, who we assumed was going to be the team's wide receiver 1, just seemed to be a part of the Steelers' passing game, not leading it, especially even when he was playing his former team in week 2. So that's where, at least for me, I'm looking at a few things. One, let's see how much, or if can we project what that split is going to look like in, let's say, even just the short term, weeks 3, 4, 5. I think it's reasonable to project project less for Caleb Johnson, even though that he wasn't seeing too much anyway. I mean, about 5% of the rushing attempts in weeks 1 and 2, just all Gainwell and Warren moving forward. All right, I think that's reasonable. I'm not going to say it's going to happen, but that type of split moving forward. But then also need to be a part of his game as Jalen Warren some third down work as well. But then it's Gainwell that's mixing in for the 2-minute drill, as you can see there in the utilization report. 100% of the 2-minute snaps in week 1, 63% in week 2. I'm looking at. I mean, if you know that your league is going to overbid, I mean, I'd be looking at the very least, if let's say if you think they're going to put out, and I'm just going to use percentages here, 15% of their budget. Let's say even lower, because I'm assuming this is probably going to be around like a 10-ish% bid for Gainwell. If you think that's going to be the case, and you're just gauging how everybody wants to bid, I would go like 2 to 3% over that, or even actually probably closer to 5%. So you're thinking it's going to be a 10% thing. Going up to 15% makes some sense to me. So at least you can secure some production at the running back position, because I'm assuming if you're targeting Gainwell, you're hurting at the RB spot. So at least trying to get something on your roster that could be useful on a week in, week out basis. And then looking at their upcoming schedule, let's see, who do the Steelers play over the next few weeks? So they've got New England. So they're traveling out to Foxborough in week 3. They do play the Vikings, which isn't the easiest of matchups, but we did just see Bijan Robinson pop off for quite a bit, and then also Tyler Algier. So that might be a decent matchup for them in week 4. They do have their bye in week 5. So I'd be looking at around like a 13 to 15% bid for Gainwell here, and that's just based off of, I'm assuming your league might fit in around or march towards, or trying to hit a 10% bid. So if you want to be a little bit more aggressive than them, maybe go on like dialing it up a little bit and getting closer to 15%. That does make some sense to me. All right. Let's see what else have we got here. Let's see. We got about another 15 minutes or so, but I'm happy to answer as many questions as possible. And like I said, I'll be here each week about 6:00 on the Wednesdays to chat with y'all, and again, use as many tools as possible. I will readily admit I do not have all the answers. That's why I rely on the data. That's why I'll pull up as many of our handy dandy tools from fantasylife.com as possible. So let's see, what else have we got here? Again, 15 minutes left, and again, just chatting here, talking about our Guillotine Leagues And we got a question from Brain Burst. What else have we got here? So let's see, my team has been finishing around 12th or 13th every week. Well, that's not bad. It's not great, not at the very top, but 12th to 13th, it's not last. That's all that matters for right now. See, I have a significant hole at running back with Samson as my RB2, but every week all my league mates are burning insane amount of fab, and I can't fix it. Okay, well, like I was kind of talking earlier about Jerome Ford, having Dylan Sampson as, let's say, your running back two, well, it's not the best, it's not the worst. So if we can pull up Sampson's usage, and actually, I wasn't even really thinking about that earlier. But going over, let's flip over to how Dylan Sampson fared in week 2 with Quinshon Judkins available and hogging most of the running back work for them. So 30% rushing share for not for Jerome Ford, almost 50% of the rush attempts for Quinshon Judkins, and of course we see Dylan Sampson all the way down there at 20%. So not necessarily what you wanted to see, especially after a more productive week 1 outing for Sampson against my Bengals. And then also the thing that I'm most concerned about for Sampson, and this is why I was a bit higher on Jerome Ford and not as keen on trying to drop him, was that like significant dip in target share. So you can see there for Dylan Sampson. If we can also show his week 1 usage on top of that, so you can see the change once Judkins came into the fold. It's 20% target share for Dylan Sampson, and that's why he was one of the top waiver wire targets. If you read Kendall Valenzuela's waiver wire article each week, she highlighted him as one of the guys that you needed to pick up, especially if you're in half or full point PPR leagues. 20% target share for a running back that's sitting out there on your waiver wire, yeah, sign me up for that. And I don't think there was anything wrong about that approach. But going from a 20% target share in week 1 down to just 7% in week 2, and it's not just the fact that he saw fewer targets, also ran fewer routes as well. And that's where using a tool like this can point you in that direction as to how much concern we should have. Because, yeah, fewer opportunities, that can happen just because not everybody's going to earn a target on each route that they run. And since Cleveland has Jerry Jeudy, Cedric Tillman, Harold Fannin, David Njoku, and we can't expect Joe Flacco to feed each one of his route runners on every single down or every single snap. And I would assume most folks would think that Jerry Jeudy, or at least I prefer Cedric Tillman, and of course Harold Fannin as the guys that he should be targeting, the rookie tight end and Cedric Tillman, that their target share would fluctuate each week. But combining a drop in target share with fewer routes, that means that, at least from a play design standpoint, and if folks were able to check out an off-season series that I put together called The Explainer, where I walk through how some of these stats are being used to put together the UR score and how we use them from a utilization standpoint week in and week out. I mean, routes, to me, and I highlighted this in the piece, that shows intent. That shows that a play designer, whether it's your offensive coordinator, whether it's your head coach, or whomever puts together the plan of attack for each week, and if you are the one that's out there running a route, that shows some level of intent from the designer saying, I want you out there doing it. Now, whether or not you can earn a target, that's a completely different skill. But I wrote a piece that highlighted how even just routes run can help establish that type of, I would say, intent, and I keep using that word, but how often they're going to be used, or how much a team values that person being out there on the field. It's almost similar to snaps. They're not just out there just for them to say that, go out there and go hit somebody or go get your cardio in for about 5 to 10 seconds. No, they want them out there for a specific reason, whether it's to pull a defense away or potentially earn a target or break through a tackle and go off for a touchdown. So that's where I do have some concern there for Dylan Sampson, because we see him running fewer routes. And we also see him earning fewer targets from Joe Flacco, and especially now with Jerome Ford earning targets, and then also Quinshon Judkins getting a target or two. Like, that's where I would have some concern. So how to fix it? I mean, going out there on your waiver wire and seeing which running backs are available, I would say that which running backs, again, without seeing who you have available on your waiver wire, what running backs can you project to see more usage moving forward? I showed you my list. I showed you the guys that are out there on the waiver wire for me right now. And if we could pull that up real quick, I can give you some. Let's kind of play a name game or comparison game or something along those lines to say like, well, which would make the most sense? So let's say Jerry McNichols versus Dylan Sampson. That's probably a toss-up, to be quite honest, since we don't know how much McNichols is going to factor into the rushing attack for the Commanders with Austin Eckler out. McNichols has caught passes in the past. He has been a I wouldn't say a solid receiver, but at least a viable receiver. So if our assumption is going to be that Bill or Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, whichever name that you want to use for the Commanders RB1, how much he's going to factor into the receiving game. It might be a split between McNichols and Chris Rodriguez for some of the work afterwards. So I think that one's a toss-up. I do just kind of lean, for at least for me personally, I will lean McNichols just because of the upside of the Commanders offense itself. If we're going to assume that once Jaden Daniels is healthy and they get back to the play calling that allows them to be at least similar or have similar efficiency to that we've seen in last season in Jaden Daniels' rookie year, at least McNichols offers more upside to me. Whereas for the Browns, how many touchdowns do you really see them scoring week in and week out? I mean, they didn't. How many did they score last week? I think it was, let's see, looking at their game log real quick. So against Cincinnati, it was 16 points against Cincinnati. And then against the Baltimore Ravens, it was 17 points. So at least given what we know, or at least have seen historically from the Commanders, do you want to invest in a team that's going to be scoring 16 to 17 points per week, or one that's probably going to be scoring 20 plus? I lean towards the 20 plus. But looking at the other guys that are available, Kyle Monungai already having to deal with Roshan Johnson and DeAndre Swift, so I don't want any of that. Tyler Beatty, same deal. Chris Brooks also having to work behind Josh Jacobs. Ty Johnson, Braylon Allen. I mean, Braylon Allen potentially sticks out as a guy that you could at least make the case that has some level, like some general, you might have some general interest in. Because even though Breece Hall has looked spry, especially in week one, not so much in week two. I think he averaged less than like 3 yards per carry, which is not the best stat to use, but at least from a descriptive standpoint, that can give you an idea of how well the Jets offense performed as a whole in week two against the Bills. But there is some usage there for Braylon Allen so far. And that is only a two-way split versus a three-way split for the Browns. So I could at least make the case of if you wanted to have not just I would say, potentially similar floor, but the path to more work later on, just because there's only one guy ahead of Allen at this point versus the potentially two ahead of Sampson right now. Okay, I could make the case there. Zamir White getting mixed in alongside Ashton Genty, but we would have to assume that Genty is going to at least be able to survive or work through the Raiders offensive line situation that has had him looking, I would say, just average from a box score standpoint. And then some of the other guys, as I continue to flip down the list, Samaje Perine, Isaiah Davis, Antonio Gibson, Devin Singletary, I would still want to keep Dylan Sampson over each of them. So that's at least the process or the idea behind trying to make some of those comparisons before. Yes, I am 100% in agreement that Dylan Sampson does have a workload concern with Judkins mixing in not just as a rusher, but a receiver. But then if you go out to the waiver wire and these are your options, trying to walk through the usage for each of them, saying, okay, well, can I tell myself a story of how their situation projects for better usage and more productive usage than what I'm currently seeing with Sampson? Because with Sampson, this is it. I mean, at best, this is what he's going to be for the rest of the year. Unless, and we've seen it happen with Jerome Ford in the past. I think he had a hamstring injury just last season. Can we see the workload start to condense around Sampson and Judkins? Potentially. I mean, especially if they get out of playoff contention. They're already sitting at 0-2. Do they want to see what their young running back rotation is going to look like, especially once things get into the point where, well, let's think about 2026 and beyond. Yes, that's possible, but how many weeks is it going to take in order for it to get there? So, I mean, playing those types of or following or going down those types of logic paths in order to say, here's where I can see the production continue to pick up, or things are just going to remain stagnant and I should move on. And that's at least the way that I try and approach a lot of these. And then afterwards, it's just making trying to make I guess the correct bid or the type of investment afterwards in order to pick up the guy and continue moving on. But all right, so let's see. I got one last question, just a few minutes left. And again, I appreciate everybody kind of hanging out for a little bit. And then if you've got any more for next week or whatever, again, please. I think again, I'm not the best at social media, but my DM should be open on social media at Chris Allen FFWX. I love to talk strategy, love to talk fantasy football, and just talk ball in general. So if you do have any other questions after today, I mean, please just drop me a line. I'm more than happy to walk through it. Send me screenshots and give me all the context that you want. And again, always happy to help out as much as possible. One last question from Mort. $1,000 Fab League. RBs are Kamara and Montgomery. How much should he bid on Barkley? All right, $1,000 Fab League. RBs are Kamara and Montgomery. How much should you bid on Barkley? So if Barkley is out there in your league, and let's go ahead and shove aside all the stuff that I said earlier about trying to just do incremental additions and changes to your roster so that instead of going from a RB3 going to an RB2 or wide receiver 4 to a wide receiver 3, toss all that out. Now you're swinging for the fences. Here's where I'm willing to bid at least 60 to 70% of my budget in order to acquire somebody like Barkley. Can we go to the UR? Daggone the market, man. These are the people that make the show work. Don't even listen to me. Your producers are the people that make these shows. I'm going to tell you that right now. So, looking at how often or how much a guy like Saquon Barkley is being used, these are the types of players that you should be aggressive about. If you look at a player and from a season long standpoint, like their utilization, how often they're earning touches, and also where those touches come from. Because if you look at the utilization report, it provides that contextual information so that we're not just talking about just all touches are not created equal, more or less. That's where a guy like Saquon stands out. UR score of 92. I mean, one of just 4 running backs that have that score as of right now. It's just him, Devon Achane, Bijan Robinson, and Christian McCaffrey. So how often do you think a running back of that caliber is going to be out there on the waiver wire? How often do you think that a running back that's not just earning most of the touches, but also sitting at a 17% target share is going to be out there on the waiver wire? So while I would want to try and make those small changes here and there to make those like limited upgrades so that once I get into the back end of the season, I'm able to make more changes and pick up or make more or acquire more significant additions to my roster that I wouldn't typically be able to do towards the earlier part of the season. Here in week 2, or going into week 3 rather, if you're telling me that a guy like that is out there on the waiver wire, you're not just swinging for the fences and making a huge addition to your team, you're also keeping them away from the rest of your league. So that's where I would say be as aggressive as you feel comfortable with. I'd be looking at putting in 60, 70, 80% of my fab in order to pick up Saquon Barkley, because at that point, you do know that you can start him on a week in, week out basis. You do know he's going to be locked in outside of the Eagles bye week, which when is that again, real quick? Philadelphia, their bye week, looks like that's week 9. So you've got him for the next 6-ish weeks before you have to worry about finding a replacement. So yeah, be as aggressive as possible so that, one, you have all of the power, and then also you're keeping that from the rest of your league. And then you also have at least a very strong squad or stable at running back as well. So, all right, that was fun. Again, I really appreciate everybody checking this out. I'll be here each Wednesday at about 6 o'clock answering all of your questions. Again, apologize if I wasn't able to get to everything. If you want to talk more about it, hit me up on social media at Chris Allen FFWX. Drop me a DM. Happy to continue talking with you through the night. And of course, my wife will probably give me some grief about continuing talking. But this is what I love to do. But for now, Again, thanks for everybody stopping by. Be back Wednesday. But if you want to catch me more, Sunday morning, Start Sit Show with Ian Harditz. So until then, catch y'all later. Peace.